All right. We're just going to give people a few seconds to get started into the webinar, so give it just a second. No, I can't spell. All right. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's WOW session. Thank you for joining us today. We have a jam-packed session planned for you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Erin Miley. I am one of the product managers here at AIM, overseeing our member services. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. Um, we have a great session today, so I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to dive right in. A couple of housekeeping rules. This is a webinar, so you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. So the way that you're going to interact with us today is going to be through the chat function. That is located at the bottom of your screen. It should say chat. If you do not readily see that, you should see a more icon with a circle and 3 dots. Click that and the chat function should be there. Great. I have some people saying hi. Awesome. Love to see it. Thank you so much. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. So that will be how you interact with us today. You're going to get some leading questions. We're going to want to hear from you today in the chat. And also be prepared to answer some fun poll questions. We're going to keep you on your toes because compliance can sometimes be a little boring. But we're going to try to keep it fun and exciting for y'all today. So that will be how you interact with us. Again, at the bottom of your screen, the chat function. If you don't readily see it, hit that more option. Also, as we reference some material today, locate that resource section. And I managed to remember to hit the activate button on those documents today. I threw out some resources that we'll be referencing throughout the conversation today. So if I reference a material later on, I will have that resource in that section there. All right, so without further ado, I am going to introduce my fellow colleague, Kris Gfell. He is our HR Services Business Manager here at AIM. He's been with AIM for a couple years now, almost heading into 4 or 5 years, 5 years.
Almost 5, Aaron. Can you
Oh
believe
my
that?
gosh. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So long. So he is going to be our presenter on our compliance on best practices for smarter hiring. So Kris, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. And those that don't know me, good morning to everybody. But those that don't know me, I am the HR Services Business Manager. The best way that I put this to others when I do training courses and just introductions is I have the pleasure of working with our members across all of our regions on different challenges that they have, whether it's recruiting challenges, there's compensation, there's just HR support challenges, things that come up in business, regardless of the size of the organization. We have different solutions, and that's where I come in and help to understand, find the right solutions, and really get something moving going forward. So I've got I'm an HR guy by background and trade. I've been in HR for nearly 25 years, various positions, various organizations. Really, grew up in manufacturing, automotive manufacturing. Try to bring my perspective and my background to help and support others. So today, as we look at compliance and best practices for smarter hiring, it's a great topic. And Aaron says compliance is boring. And yeah, okay, there is that boring part of compliance, but it's really, really important. It's important for a variety of factors. We're going to cover a lot of this. And as you see here from the agenda that comes up, is really looking at why things matter, right? Why smart hiring practices matter. We want to talk about our employment applications, right? So some of the tactical pieces that we use, not just in HR, but as business tools. Another key tool, job descriptions. Again, some things that are forgotten, but we want to talk about them, right? We have to bring them up. There's great practices, and it's a really good tool for your business. And then some onboarding essentials, and then we're going to wrap it up. So that's going to take us here through our time today. And really just, we want to be able to have a good conversation and share some things with you. And of course, as Aaron said, we've got some polls along the way to kind of gauge where you are. And again, bring up some good information for you. But again, don't hesitate to use the chat, give us some feedback, and we'll be able to get through some questions as well. So let's kick off and talk about why smart hiring matters, right? This is, smart hiring we look at is having that strong process that impacts your business. It's not just about filling a role, right? This is about building a process that is strategic. You have compliance that you worry about, but also efficiency, right? This is what our business leaders want. Others that we bring in to our procedures and our practices for human resources, we want to make sure that we're using those efficient practices as well. And we want to, of course, set up the new hire and the organization for long-term success. I don't know if I've ever gone into a hiring situation and said, this is going to be short-term. I'm not worried about overall success. No, we always want success. So what does this look like, right? We have to focus on like what smart hiring looks like. When we talk about this, what does it look like? We want to make sure that we're using up-to-date and inclusive job descriptions, right? So again, our tools are up to date. That's really important. Why? Because we want to attract the right candidates. We want to set expectations clear from day one. We also want to eliminate some outdated or risky application questions that comes up. We want to implement some structured onboarding process, maybe checklists if you're using those, if you're using electronic documentation and processes, right? All of that's really important as well. We want to ensure that every new hire gets the same thorough, welcoming start, right? That's really important. Build that consistency. That goes right into aligning hiring practices with our business goals, right? We want to ensure that our team is hiring for the future of the organization, not just the immediate vacancy. We want to also look at, automating parts of the process to save time, use technology. And last, but certainly not least, and this is probably one of the hardest pieces we work through, is communication, right? Communication and boost our brand. We want to communicate internally. We want to communicate externally. But all of that has an impact on hiring process and our business success. Okay? Goals that we have in mind to do so: reduce turnover and hiring costs. We want to strengthen our culture and employee engagement. And of course, enhance productivity by getting the right people in the right roles, right? That's really what smart hiring is all about. And this is business success, right? We're going to be able to take part of that from the HR side, or if we're not in HR, right? If we're a small organization and we don't have that HR, we don't have an HR title, but this is the function we have. We want to be able to do it in a smart and efficient way, because obviously that we're working different roles and various roles in the organization. We have to be successful, and to do that, we bring these types of criteria and tools to us. Now, on the flip side, right? What happens when you don't have things that are strategic in place, right? No process that's strategic or focused on compliance or efficiency. Hiring becomes reactive to your situations. You have inconsistencies that drive non-compliance, right? You're building friction from the start, and it can cost you time, money, reputation. There's a lot out there. So what does this look like, right? What do these criteria really mean, and what does it look like to maybe be misaligned and not hire smartly, or look at your practices that way? Maybe you're reusing the same job description from 5 years ago, right? You have an opening and you're just like, okay, yep, we have this role, off it goes, and that's what we're going to recruit for. I'm going to guess in 5 years the role has evolved, but expectations haven't, right? This is where then confusion lines in and comes into the organization. So we want to make sure that we're updating as we go. So without smart hiring practices, right? So those examples, same job description from 5 years ago. Maybe your application asks for information that is no longer acceptable. And yes, we're going to talk about actually in depth on applications. They're important, but if you look at it and say, wow, hold on, we're asking for a birth date, or we're asking for marital status or salary history, red flags, right? Send up the red flag, pull it back, let's get it updated, right? That could very easily invite legal trouble. And when we talk about legal trouble, well, now we're talking about time, money, and other concerns for the organization. If we're misaligned again, we get new hires that show up with no idea what to expect, right? Maybe there's no onboarding plan. There's, technology is not available for somebody coming in to be efficient and really hit the ground running with you for employment. Maybe there's no paperwork ready, right? Nobody assigned to greet them. You run into compliance issues when we talk about timing of completion forms. Then you get, your internal team. Are they feeling the love of being set up for success, right? Are they winging it during an onboarding process, or even take a step back? Are they winging it during interviews? Are candidates getting inconsistent information that the team, then cannot fairly compare applicants? That's a big deal when we talk about this. And even when you go into interviews, are we setting our managers up to succeed with training opportunities? Do they really understand what can I ask? What can I not ask is almost as important. And are we aligning it back to what criteria and culture and environment we're really looking for as an organization within the interview process? Maybe you skip the I-9 check. We see this consistently, whether it's just conversations or when we're completing HR audits, that I-9s can kind of get messy. And these are ones from the federal government. And I know there's changes that happen. We're going to talk about some of the I-9 changes that have occurred recently and how to manage going forward. But we want to make sure that we're using the I-9s the way that it's meant, right? There's a lot of instruction to it. Just make sure that you follow you follow the schedule that's included with your I-9s. But you have to have verification of documentation. You've got to store information and store your forms. And lastly, maybe you're rushed to hire without alignment on the role, right? That's a key piece. Is you're going to see it probably pretty quickly if you made a bad hire. Some of it turns up later, but if you're really going through your due diligence, you're using tools to your advantage. You're using your team. You're training your team. You're going to be getting past square one, right? When you have misalignment of a hire, you see it and you just jump backwards. And we all know, right, the different metrics that are out there around what the cost of a bad hire is. How we have just bad alignment within the organization. So we just want to make sure that we're doing things smart. We create some efficiency. We're using technology to help, but we've got to do some checks along the way. And that's a key piece. So we just want to make sure that we are reducing errors. We're not creating more work for ourselves. And overall, we're building trust and transparency within the organization. So on that, we get into one of our very first tools. And the key tool, this is the first thing that applicants typically see, unless there's referral or we know somebody and we're talking to them about a role. We're probably still getting them back into our application process, right? It's always the best practice. Get them in and have them complete an application. It is the most basic of process to follow, yet there's some complications that we can run into along the way. So when we look at this, right, we want to say, why do they still matter, right? Because that's a question we get. Erin gets this as she works with clients and setting up AIM track, which is our ATS and our applicant tracking system. Don't want to throw a three-letter term out there for you. So your applicant tracking system, usually where your applications are going to exist. But what's funny, Erin, you still get paper process come through, Erin. And Erin, I'm going to put you on the spot here, right? We still have questions of paper applications. They still exist because this blows my mind. I was dealing with paper applications 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, no. Every time I get on a demonstration call still today, I still get the question, well, if we get handed a paper application, how do we handle that? How do we handle that situation? And it's completely a valid question because you want your paper application process to be the same as your online process as well. They should mirror, they should be consistent. And you should have a way to do that and incorporate it into your technology as well. Most systems will be able to handle that process for you. But it is still amazing that people want to submit via paper in this day and age, but also understanding like, there are those industries where they have lower tech individuals. It is still a valid method of applying.
Yeah, and
But
I
it's
can even see this too, Aaron, in situations where we look at, the need to comply with those that may not have technology available to them, may have a disability that prevents them from utilizing the technology that we've offered to complete an application process. So now it becomes a secondary process that is available to them. Again, from a compliance perspective, right? I'll say reduce risk is the alternative method to complete an application in some ways.
Yes, absolutely. And, there are ways to help introduce them to the tech that you have and help them apply. if you're ever interested in automating your process and fully going paperless, I have tons of ideas that will help you implement that within your organization. But, you can help guide them to the tech if you're really wanting to make the effort to go paperless. But, there are also ways to incorporate any paper process that you may need to accommodate those individuals into your current tech processes as well. But I think key, and we may get into it, I think, in a slide or two. The key is to remain consistent across all platforms, no matter what methodology you're using.
Yep, absolutely. And I think to your point there, Aaron, it kind of hits our first bullet point here on the screen, right? That is establishing a uniform process for collecting
Mhm.
candidate information, right? So I'll look at that and say, well, that's consistent, right? We want to have a consistent process that we are using. So when I think of that, there's some criteria here around consistency. It's like we're standardizing the application itself. So we know every single candidate is submitting the same core information. They're answering the same questions. Why that's really important is we're making it easier to compare qualifications, right? So when we look at that, whether it's, we are the HR leader and we're going through those first, it's our recruiter and that's our role. It's our hiring teams that are reviewing. You can easily compare from person to person, right? We know resumes look, feel, totally different from one to the next. You can have completely differing views of resumes. Your application is going to allow you to compare. If you're using an electronic process, an ATS, you're going to be able to see some things set up visually for you where you can just compare multiple on one screen. Makes it a lot easier. So you're doing that objectively. You're doing the comparison objectively. You're reducing that risk of unconscious bias by focusing on job relevant information only. And unconscious bias, right? Everybody has it. And I always use the term with this is, it's what makes us humans. There are unconscious bias. It's just the way that we're wired. And we can get distracted by that and not even realize it. So having your application set up to feed information to you and the right information, it's just relevant to that job that you're looking for. Also helps prevent decisions just based solely on a resume, which we know can vary widely in, as I mentioned, in format, in depth, in just what's included. So there's some key criteria there. Also, we look at fair hiring practices and compliance with regulations, right? Applications act as and keep this in mind, a formal record of candidate disclosures, authorizations, what they're affirming. I say it on purpose. And where I live, it's in bold. We have to remember this is a record. So we need to ensure that what is included on that record is the right information. We have to be compliant with what we're asking because all of that information is coming back. We're using that to make decisions. That is a record that will be on file. You, of course, can include required language that comes in, at will employment, EEO statements, your background check consents,
Hold on.
typically not part of a resume.
Don't include your background check statement in there.
Not on the application itself, but
Not on the application.
within your overall application process is
Yes,
where you have your background check consents. So, yep,
I
thank
will
you, Aaron.
accept that, but it should be its own
It's
separate
its
authorization.
own authorization. Absolutely. We just talk about the application process from that point.
It's my little caveat on the background.
Absolutely. And and keep in mind, you're really establishing a trail of documentation at this point when you're getting in with your applications, right? You've got that, employee record. If the candidate's hired, you have now the start of an employee record, right? It's helpful in audits or disputes that come in. You're showing that, again, consistent process across all candidates, which is important if hiring decisions are ever challenged, right? You go back to that process that you've established. And of course, then you're supporting transparency and accountability within the hiring process itself. And that really lives internally for you and your team. But let's not forget, it helps us capture key details that resumes won't include. And as I mentioned, right, resumes are somebody selling themselves. On applications, it's just more of a formal, this is what the organization is asking me to provide. So you get in on applications like that, you have the opportunity to learn about authorization to work in the United States, which based on certain roles can be really important. Okay, where somebody's coming from in terms of physical, if it's remote jobs, what type of process they may need for employment in the future. So you understand that upfront. Your willingness to travel or relocate, right? That's not something that people put on their resume, but that's information that you can gain through your app process. You get into, even if you have the need for certain roles, of driver's license requirements, right? So you get into those questions that come through. So you're also looking at verification of employment history, your education credentials, professional licenses, right? So hey, a common one in HR is, are you certified through either, HRCI or SHRM, right? And carry credentials that way. That again, you might see that on a resume, but again, we want to compare apples to apples. And the easiest way to do it is ask the question through your application process. And I use that kind of loosely, but this is where having technology supporting you is really important, because a piece of paper, a paper application, you're not really changing, and it's not going to get down to job specific questions like you could if you have an ATS. Whereas an ATS, you're hiring in for maybe an HR generalist, and you want a certification. HR certification is a requirement. And you can ask that question within your application process versus a piece of paper. You're not going to have that opportunity. But again, that's just using your system and your technology to be smart and working the process the way that you want it to work. So we have a lot that goes through. Aaron, I know, as you and I were talking and prepping here, we still receive questions around self-identification, right? In our companies, eliminating disclosure questions, maybe some things that are changing with ATS providers on this side, and even others, as we just have kind of a changing landscape of what we can really look at with candidates and employees. Anything that you can share on this? Just I know you're so close with so many of our members that use AIMTrack.
So I get that. So since the EO came, the executive order came out, I have been getting this question a lot about, am I seeing a trend of a lot of employers removing that the voluntary disclosure from their application process? Is that the recommendation? Blah, blah, blah. I'm not seeing that as a trend. I am getting a lot of those questions, but I'm not actually seeing people actually request the removal of it. The trend is the question, actually, which is the funny response. It's on a case by case basis at this time. Keep in mind the veteran status was not removed from the executive order. The veteran status, the disability, that was not removed. So, that is still part of the EEO. So, keep that in mind. We can, your systems, where I know AIMTrack, I can only speak to AIMTrack. So these would be questions that you need to ask your current providers. But our system, we can turn off sex and race specifically and leave on veterans and disability. So if that is a request that you want to make of your systems, I would explore that with them specifically. It's a case by case basis at this time. If you ask, I've been asked specifically if our entire system is going to make an alteration, and our system provider has said no. It's going to be up to the employer to make those decisions for themselves. Because they don't want to have that responsibility to make the decision on behalf of the employers, which it's fair. So, and I hazard a guess a lot of systems are going to take that stance. So, just kind of keeping that in mind, as you use systems of an ATS like that, you take on the burden as the employer to make those decisions. And I would ask that you consult your attorneys. You can consult AIM, you can consult me, but I'm gonna ultimately say I would recommend you consult your employment attorney. Or you can consult Tanya. She's been dealing with the OFCCP a lot. She's very knowledgeable in what's happening in this space. She would be a great resource here at AIM as well if you need to get some feedback or bounce ideas off of. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're standing on that particular area right now.
Yeah, and what I hear there too, and I think it's maybe, I don't know if you just came out and said it, but it's in your message, is it's, as the employer, it's your responsibility to ensure that your application has the right language, not your ATS provider. Whoever it is, if it's me, I go in and ask the questions back to my provider, just to
Mhm.
ensure that I can set myself up to succeed. Right?
Yeah.
It's me on the line, me and the organization on the line. So I want to make sure that I'm going to ask the right question. I'm just not going to wait for information to come to me, and maybe if I even don't even fully understand. It's so complicated, and there's been so many changes that your provider should be there to help support you. And I know I can lean on what we have with AIM and our team, and know that we're going to provide you with information. We do push a lot of information to you, and just as where Aaron's coming from is, these are questions we've had come through, and we know there's some confusion. We know that not everything's very straightforward, but us as a provider for you with the ATS platform, we want to be able to support you so you can make the best decisions for your organization.
Mhm.
And hopefully your ATS provider is doing the same thing. If you don't have that provider, you want to make sure that you are studying enough and use the solutions team, right? Do
Mhm.
outreach to the hotline and understand, okay, what do I need to change in some statements? Where, is this acceptable? What's the latest statements I should be including? What are the latest questions? Give me the latest template of an application that I can utilize.
Mhm.
All of that's important as you take in information so you can better understand where you're at.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that takes us to compliance, which is always, as an HR leader, I've always been more on the risk averse side, which is why compliance just fits, right? I mean, it's just one of these things here of, okay, what should we do and what should we not do? Well, there's a lot that we have on the should include. Here's the caveat with compliance is, we've got a small piece here that we can touch on. There's obviously more to, when we look at compliance for applications, even getting into your onboarding and just employment in general, you really open up so many categories of regulations that we have to keep in mind. We touch on some key pieces and some big ones here. So what you want to include, and we'll talk about even what you shouldn't include, right? You want to make sure that you have disclosures in place. And when we talk about disclosures, like there's some of the basics come to mind. Your at-will employment statements. Okay, so your at-will employment statement's really important, right? This clarifies that either party can terminate the employment relationship at any time. And you have elements to keep in mind, like there's an indefinite term, right? This is just something that goes on. It's not from this date today to a date in the future. It's indefinite. It can be termination of employment by either party. The employer can choose to terminate, or employee can choose to terminate us, right? They can leave and go somewhere else. There's a disclaimer of, make sure you have a disclaimer of implied contracts. And then this is where some additional studying comes in, is what type of local laws do you maybe have in place that would be an exception, or union agreements that come into play. So this is, having your at-will and your at-will employment statements key. Your EEO statement also comes in, right? So this is really reinforcing your commitment to equal opportunity and non-discrimination. Typically, you go forward with these, standard federally protected characteristics, right? So race, color, religion, sex, national origin, those characteristics that we're very familiar with. Again, I know there's a changing landscape of EEO and affirmative action, but this still remains, right? These are still federally protected classes. And then we get in when we look at your application certification, right? So the signature line. And again, old school on paper, literally a signature line. Now we're probably having people check the box and it's electronic signature through our applicant tracking systems. But that's, again, saying that the information provided is true and accurate, right? That's really important, because if something comes back where you go through and maybe now you're into background check process and something comes back and it does not align with what that applicant put on their form and what they submitted to you, there could absolutely be a problem, right? So that is really important to come back and say this is true and accurate. I have stories through my career of the last 20 some years of we found non-factual information. Some were found right away. Others were found what I inherited and then had to take care of during somebody's employment. So it's really important to pay attention to information that is coming through from the applicant side. So we've already covered this piece, but I have it in my, make sure that we are working through this on the background check notice and authorization. So again, not part of your application, but you get through with your application process. So if your process includes background checks, there's disclosures and consent that comes through. So Aaron, can you bring the group up to speed on maybe what that looks like and where within their process they would implement that type of notice or authorization?
Well, so it wouldn't necessarily be part of like the traditional application. You may need in some jurisdictions, you may be required to post it within your job description. There are some state laws that have passed where you are now required to post it within the job description. That is new. That is fairly recent in the last year for some states. So if you weren't aware, check your state laws. But if you're Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Florida, you that has not occurred for you yet. I know that's primarily a lot of the audience online. Um, Now, this would come out primarily after like the initial application, after the initial resume. Honestly, your background authorization and disclosures don't really come in until after the offer has been made and accepted. That's the best practice. That's when you get into your background authorization disclosures, and those are usually separate from your traditional application process. You can reference it during interviews that you will be doing that as part of the process of hire. In some states, that is not allowed until a certain part of the interview process. So just check your specific jurisdiction. I really, really just cannot stress enough. Check your state law and jurisdiction notices on where you're located because every little tiny jurisdiction has its own law. But for the majority of you, uh, best practice would be at the time of offer acceptance, you are good to hand out those background authorization disclosure forms. That is when you are getting their signature and their authorization to perform it. That's where in the application process it would happen.
Yeah, and so that's I throw that out there. It's the contingent job offer, right?
Yeah.
So we have a job offer that is contingent upon
Yes.
passing successfully our background screening process or a pre-employment screening, right? There's good terminology out there,
Yes.
but then that's where these come into play. So again, part of the application process, because I look at this and say our application process is it's kind of like we look at onboarding somebody. Well, onboarding starts when we're interviewing and we're working through job offer. I'm starting onboarding at that point because I'm internally preparing, but I'm also preparing that person for what these expectations are. So no, that's good, Aaron. And again, we get into some things that you should not include, right? So here we go with our combined background authorization. And then we want to make sure questions don't violate labor laws or create bias, right? That's a key piece here, right? So anything related to age, race, gender, religion, right? Those protected characteristics. You can ask about work authorization, but we can't ask about citizenship, right? And so I kind of mentioned like work authorization if somebody requires sponsorship, right? For instance, and having that as a standard question. Again, we build standard and consistencies here. And then we get into things to watch out for. Okay. And some of this, again, there's a lot to watch out for. Again, we're coming from a compliance perspective, so we just want to make sure that we're hitting the high items here. Ban the box. And ban the box, that it's a term from a number of years ago, but it absolutely still exists. It's think of this as regulations that prohibit you from asking about criminal history on an initial job application, right? So that box refers to the checkbox asking applicants if they've been convicted of a crime. So the goal here is to give individuals that fair shot at employment before criminal history is considered. And many states and municipalities now enforce these, and some even restrict criminal background checks until after that conditional job offer, right? So that contingent job offer. So we want to make sure we keep in mind when we're going through our process about criminal history. Also, and we see this all the time with recruitments that we're working on, salary history. And there's many states that have put in regulations and even localities around preventing pay discrimination and looking at current pay and setting somebody up for what they can earn with you and what compensation could be in their next role. So it's not being allowed to ask the questions on salary history, right? There's other ways to do it. You can focus on salary expectations. That's a key way to handle this. Also, we're getting into pay transparency and pay transparency expectations from the employer side, meaning we need to, when we put a job ad out and we start a recruitment, we need to have that range established. And there's criteria, it varies from state to state that have transparent pay transparency laws in place. So again, it's key to understand the states that you're recruiting in, because it might be different. Even if they share borders, you can have different criteria from one state to the next. So you want to make sure that you understand, what do I need to put into my job ad from a salary perspective, or whether it's a range, or when we're talking total compensation and benefits. It seems like every state is doing something different these days. It's not every state has a requirement, but we're going, and the way that I look at this is, let's prepare ourselves that we just need to comply with it across the board, regardless of where we're recruiting, and just be transparent. I think there's good communication standards that come in play. But again, we can't ask questions, that like, what are you currently, where are you currently at with your salary? But we can look at where they are and what they're willing to tell us of their salary expectations. So keep that in mind. You've just other regulatory specifics come in. That's a key piece. Some of it we may not know. Some of it you may not know, especially if you're going from one state to the next, or now you have employees, or you're looking to hire in a new state to you. It's really key to reach out and start to understand what you have on your plate. The best way, and I always promote this when I do training, is use the hotline, right? We're AIM members. Use the hotline, use the benefits that come through, and whether it's picking up the phone and calling, or it's going through and sending an email over, connect with the solutions team. Use your dashboard. There's so much information out there. Like, it's a full-time job to try to understand what is actually happening that I have to comply with. Use the resources you have available through us. So just make sure you've got good resources, just like being here on the WOW session today. Learning a little bit more, but these regulatory specifics, there's many, and this is, again, resources here through AIM to help you out.
Okay, so we're gonna have a fun little poll that I'm gonna launch. So we're gonna see if everybody's awake. It's gonna be fun. All right, so get ready, y'all. We are going to launch the poll, and the poll is going to be, what was the reason you last updated oh wait, hold on. No, I launched the wrong poll. Hold on.
Yep.
I launched the wrong poll, y'all. Launch. Can I go back? Oh, it's already launched. Okay. Well, we're gonna get your job description. What was the reason you last updated your job description? We'll get that one. We'll ask the other question later.
That'll
I got
work.
backwards. I knew something was gonna go backwards today. I just knew it when I had technical difficulty setting up the WOW session this morning. All right, so let's see. All right, so we're having some interesting questions. Do we all love my responses? Also, if you haven't personalized your chat GPTs for those who online use AI in support of their roles, if you haven't given it a personality yet, highly recommend, because hey, mine has a personality and it helped me drive the responses to this current this current poll. All right, I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds. Couple more seconds.
Aaron, are we going to see poll results? Because I don't even get to see them yet.
I know, I'm going. All right, we're gonna end poll, and then I'm gonna share results for everybody. Can you see the share, Chris?
Yes.
All right. So it looks like the last what was the last reason everyone updated their job description? It looks like the job evolved a lot, like Pokemon level evolved. I love that. Second winner was, it finally made its way to the top of my to-do list. I kind of figured that would be a lot for a lot of us. And it hadn't been touched since flip phones were a thing, was the third winner. So that's interesting. So I will share the poll results along with a copy of the recording in today's slide deck after today's session. So, all right, look for another fun poll here in a few minutes.
Aaron, do you want to launch your application poll right now?
Okay, we can do that one too. We'll launch a secondary poll because it's more applicable and I made a mistake. So we'll launch
Yeah.
the secondary poll. All right, so let's see here. Can I do that? Oh, I have to stop sharing. What? Oh, stop sharing. There we go. All right, so get ready, y'all. You're gonna have a secondary poll. This was the one that should have been launched because Erin is apparently on top of her game. So, when was the last time you updated your job application? That one's the one that I should have launched. Give you a few seconds to lock in your answers because there's some fun answers in there. I'm not gonna lie. Again, my ChatGPT has a personality and it helped me create the responses. All right. And also you guys are kind of stuck with my personality in here as well, because let's just be honest.
Aaron, we like being stuck with you. It's okay.
All right, give me a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to end poll and we're going to share the results. So it looks like the last time we updated, It's Fresh and Fabulous was number 2, updated in the past month, which if you are that category, good job you. There were 12 of you on that category. Number 1 response was this year sometime. I think it's a blur. But hey, if you did it this year, you're still on top of your game. It looks like number 3 slot was kind of a tie, not since remote work was a temporary thing and updated. I thought the system did that automatically. So that is an interesting response. So if you are using your ATS systems and you are thinking that they are updating them automatically, they are not. Most systems have agreements in place where it's the employer's responsibility to update their own applications. So that's a little non-known fact. So if you're inheriting a system, if you're coming into an organization and you're inheriting an HRIS system or an ATS system, check those agreements that you're inheriting for the wording on the employer's responsibilities for the applications that are built in. So fun fact, if you're using AIM-Track, because, again, that's the system I know best, there is wording in your agreements that say it's the employer's responsibility to have the application on us. So it's your responsibility to make the changes or alert to any changes you need to your application. Although we do our best to alert you to things that you need to be aware of, it's ultimately your responsibility to let me know if you need those changes made. So just kind of keep that in mind to check those. I recommend checking it annually, either those agreements or just check those applications annually. Fun. You can go through the process and check the process for your applicants on a regular basis. Put yourself through as a test applicant on a regular basis. See what your onboarding process looks like. See what your recruiting process looks like. It's good to do it at least once a year just to make sure it's still efficient, still what you think it is. And it's also, we'll check your application process for you. So.
Yeah, I think, and it's a good place to be to ensure that you are aligned with expectations from regulatory standards, but then
Mhm.
also expectations internally. And Cynthia, so I see your comment here, Cynthia, and hello, good, haven't seen you in a while. So glad you're here. But your applications have pre-screened questions, so they're tailored to specific positions, and you're updated by posting.
Mhm.
I think this is a place, especially with an ATS, that a lot of people live, and maybe that's where we saw with the poll results. So many of you had, more recently updated your application. I think I'm just going to assume it's probably related to Cynthia's specific situation where you are tailoring it to and customizing it to a position, which you're going to have your core elements that remain the same across positions. Right, your name, right, all of those things that you're coming through, the basic information from an employee from a candidate, and then you get into tailored questions, right? The things you can look at and pre-qualify. You can weed people out, right? Those that may not be qualified. So all of that comes through, and from just a consistent approach of we're recruiting for a position, let's go through. What we can't forget to do though is some of these, I'm sure people have evergreen postings, evergreen meaning we put it up, we are constantly looking for this position. We are never not recruiting for a customer service rep or a production operator, right? Whatever that position may be for you, you're always recruiting. Don't forget to go in and update from time to time. Just like you would update and say, oh, I need to, take it down, maybe change one thing just to get it to the top of the list or toward the top of the list on Indeed or LinkedIn or whatever your job search engines are. So you want to make sure that you're making some of those changes. And if you're changing the role, because this happens, this is real life. where we're struggling to fill a job, we need to change some of the criteria. You want to make sure that your application and your questions, your qualifiers, change with what your expectations are now that you've been recruiting for 60 days, right? 30 days, 60 days, 90, right? As it goes on, make sure that you're keeping that updated. The other piece here is ensure that you have consistency between formats. So your paper and your digital are asking and matching in terms of questions and disclosures. Your branding and tone are the same, right? Again, you're looking at candidate experience, and that's really, really important. Just again, I look at onboarding as starting as we're interviewing and we get through. So you want that experience to align and just make sure a key part with technology is make sure your applications feed naturally into your process, right? You don't want to duplicate your input, right? And having to manage candidate information in one system and then into another. Build it so that you can have bridges between technology, or it's an all-in-one platform. That again, we're looking at smart hiring practices. That's certainly a key piece. All right, job descriptions. Job descriptions are the best. This is tongue in cheek because they are the best the best tool you can have to use. But boy, are they hard to keep updated sometimes, and keep others in line. Again, I look at this. It's an HR piece that we carry. We carry the torch on this, but we need others to help and support within our job description. So, Aaron, I don't know. Can you show the poll results again, or are those gone?
Um, I can absolutely. I believe I can view. This is for the job descriptions. Yep. Can
Yep.
you see the results?
Yeah, there we go. Cool.
Yeah.
So if I look at this, right, the job evolved a lot, right? So it's job evolution was the last time that we have updated for 22 out of 50, 44% of us. The job has evolved in some way, right? That's telling us, hey, we need to keep up with our documentation. So kudos to people for that. It is hard to do. We've all, I'm sure, been in the place of I'm not sure. Like it finally made its way to the top of my list, so it became a priority. Which would probably be like something happened to make it a priority. Somebody actually read it. I like that. I like that one. There's a few of us in that category. So and then had a lot of questions, and that drove into we need to update this.
Mhm.
Updating is key, right? We want to make sure that when we look at our job descriptions, it's relevant to today, right? Because it carries a key role for organizations. We use it for hiring, we use it for maintaining compliance, we use it for performance management. We get into compensation structure that we are using job descriptions for. You cannot have a compensation structure without updated, I will say, job summaries and job descriptions are great, but at least job summaries, which is your core responsibilities and duties of a role, right? So we're really looking here at how important job descriptions are. I get on a soapbox when I do some training on these, and like this is the key document you need to have because it's used in so many different ways, but it is one that can be easily forgotten, or it's just kind of gets pushed down to the list. It's not as important. Kind of feel the same way about handbooks. Handbooks are really important, but one of those is it really driving business for us. I think job descriptions are driving business with us because if we have misalignment, things go wrong, right? There's confusion. It can cause chaos. It can cause overlap of duties. It can cause a lot of misinterpretation of responsibilities, and that's really hard. So what we want to look at is making sure that we have our recruiting up to speed with job descriptions. Our compensation structure are using job descriptions. Of course, performance reviews. How can you review and manage somebody's performance without looking at how they are performing against their job? And again, the job's going to go back to what are our essential functions in a job description. It helps your recruiters and hiring managers attract the right talent. Maybe I'm not a recruiter. Maybe I have a recruiter or recruiting department or talent management department that works through this. Well, if they don't have the right tool with the right information, how can they perform well from a recruiting perspective? Or maybe they're recruiting and they're getting candidates in, but they're not the right candidates. And we're just spinning wheels of this job opening that exists. So there's a lot that job descriptions are used for and how important they are. But when we look at misalignment, right, that gets into those recruiters attracting the wrong talent. We have compliance vulnerabilities that come through. Okay. One I can point at is if we don't have an updated job description with essential functions. And when I say essential functions, I mean in like 5 to 7 core duties are your essential functions. They won't change. That is the job. You can run into trouble against ADA accommodations, right? When you're having an ADA accommodation conversation, which I would always look at what is the role that somebody is asking for some accommodation against. So we want to make sure we have an updated job role that we're going through. And I've seen some comments here, just kind of watching the chat, as we do review these annually, right? We're going through, maybe it is even along the side of there's just been priorities, and we're reviewing the job description every time we recruit. It's a great opportunity to make an adjustment when you have an opening. We just want to make sure that we're using this, and we know it exists, and our business team members know it exists, right? Our hiring managers, our department leaders, or our executives, right, of how important job descriptions really are. One key one that I didn't even mention, but you have to, because it's been on the radar for more than a year, is the classification under Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA. Again, you go through and do a check against FLSA for exempt or non-exempt status, it's more often than not going to hinge on duties of the job description. And so you then need to make determination of, how do we flex it, or do we need to change a job, or are we going to what is the easier way to pay and build in for a non-exempt status. So we want to make sure those duties align to what the expectations are within the business. And keep in mind, job descriptions, just like policies, if you're ever working through a court proceeding, right, and there is somebody has brought something up to the court, and you have to supply information to protect yourself, first things they're going to ask for: policies and job descriptions, based on the situation. But policies are usually, first and foremost. So it's a key piece to keep in mind. And again, it's such a key document to go through. So just some good practices here, and some things to consider, right? Look at your essential and non-essential functions. You want to make sure that you're defining core job duties versus occasional or non-critical tasks. I cringe sometimes when I see 3 pages of a job description, something that's really long. That's really hard to say, well, what is the job? Define those essential functions at the top if you can, if you know a lot of these other tasks exist. I know we get hiring managers that say single thing this person does is critical. Well, we know that's not the case, right? We can drive that down, and we have tools to help say, okay, let's define that a little bit more in depth, so we know what this line item means for somebody and what they're asked to do. So that's going to help reduce your legal risk by clearly documenting expectations. Again, you get into making decisions around discipline or termination, right? That's the key here, is let's protect ourselves. And of course, it assists when we're defending against wrongful termination or discrimination claims. We've talked about the FLSA and compliance there, of accuracy of exempt and non-exempt classification status. There's just some really big pieces that stand out from a job description standpoint that really say, okay, we need to make sure we're using this as the right tool for us, with clear, inclusive language, right? We want to make sure that we're keeping things up to date and aligning roles with what the business needs, and not just today, but our future workforce and where we're going. That takes us into onboarding for success, and just to touch on a couple key pieces here. And I know we get talking, Aaron, and then we run out of time to go in depth of where we want to be. But I'm going to pick on a couple things here, because I think they're really important. The first is the I-9 process. And why this is so important is we know the government is starting to put in some criteria that says we're going to start monitoring things a little bit more closely. And as such, we had a change in a form, the I-9 form, earlier this month. Wasn't a major change, and we still have older forms that can be utilized, but that tells us, okay, we're in a changing landscape here, and we need to ensure that we are using this appropriately. So key piece here: somebody starts with employment, they've got to fill it out and get it to you on day 1. Okay, that's key. And then you have 3 business days to fill out the employer section and to verify documentation that they have for you. So section 2, right, coming in, and you want to make sure that you're meeting those dates. And then you flow into E-Verify as well. And E-Verify is a great tool. I know federal contractors is I think likely a requirement on the federal contractor side, and then some states and jurisdictions Local jurisdictions do have E-Verify compliance needs as well. But this is after the I-9 is complete. So don't confuse it as, well, if I do E-Verify, then that's all I need to do. No, this is after. You're going to use the I-9 to complete E-Verify, and that is after the I-9 is completed. So you want to make sure that you're using this as, again, as a good tool, but you're also retaining it and storing it the right way. So you have to retain it for 3 years after the hire date or 1 year after termination, whichever is later. I always use, if I can go through when somebody leaves employment, I'm going to pull them out of my main I-9 file and move them to the back and I'm going to make a note on a sticky and put what date that I can destroy that document. You just start building in a process for yourself, but you're keeping this separate from your main personnel file. Which also you want to keep the other things separate from your main personnel file, like benefit information, medical information. You get into incidents also are kept, and you get into the side of you're investigating an incident, right? I'm going to keep an incident folder instead of something in an employee's file. Disciplinary action, maybe stemming from an incident, can go into the employee's file, but not the investigation itself. Where you're probably learning about a situation from multiple people. So there is a lot here in just let's make sure that we have our documentation in control and we know how to handle things. Last one on this slide here, get your acknowledgements set and make sure that people are signing them. Your handbook acknowledgement, key. Everybody signs off on that, and you're keeping a copy of that, whether it's digital or it's a hard copy. You get through your offer process, right? Make sure that you're keeping that signed offer, or the authorizations that are in place. Those, again, can be audited. You have records. You need to make sure you're having access to records for the life of that employment, plus number of regulations will say plus so many years after employment ends as well. So again, want to be successful on that side. And Aaron, I think I think we've made it here with minutes to spare. And I know you've got a couple of things that you want to wrap up with. So I'll let you kind of jump in here and help us wrap up with our takeaways.
Okay, cool. So I just want to make note, I put it into the chat, the the most recent version of the I-9 form and a copy of the I-9 instructions for that form are in the resource section of the Zoom. So down below, if you locate the resource section, you can get the copy of that form there. So if you haven't gotten it, check it out. If you're using Onboard EXP, those of you online, it's automatically updated, so don't worry about it. We have a couple questions that I want to field through you, Kris. So Julie asked, we no longer have any paper applications. They're completely paperless right now. And she always wonders if we should have one available to be allowed to be completed. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a good practice because you never know, but it really comes into play of where are you going to likely receive an application from? If if you have an office and maybe you have a walk-in, I may not even need a paper application then. I can guide somebody to our formal electronic process. So it's a practice if needed. It's not required. What you would want to look at is, if somebody does maybe have a disability and they don't have the capability to use technology. They may have some other need and maybe other tools themselves to fill out something differently. So maybe it's an alternative process that you would need to have. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean paper at that point.
Right.
So again, it's just a practice, but based on who you are, what you do, where you are, and how you recruit.
Yeah. And then we had another question. In Illinois, Doug has a question in Illinois, do we need to update expired I-9 docs?
Update expired I-9 docs.
The
From
verification documents.
from the standpoint of like if it's expired now because we've gone in time and we have an expired driver's license, or what somebody has supplied. No, we get into different requirements when we have permanent resident documentation. And if somebody is not a United States citizen and there's work authorization involved, then there are specific requirements that is built into your I-9 process. And so we know the I-9 form is like a 2-page document, right? Or a 3-page
Mhm.
document is typically what we see. If you look at it, it's actually, I don't know what today is, 15 pages long because there's instructions included. And
Mhm.
so you can, I think they've actually done a decent job of giving good instruction within the form itself.
Mhm. And Doug, if you have follow-up questions to that, you can reach out to the solutions team. They can definitely answer any follow-up
Yep.
questions to that. You have that at your beck and call.
Yep.
Literally.
And
Give them a
I
call.
see I see Becky's question on here too of acceptability of it, probably just, it's your digital files. Yes, no, totally acceptable. I think that's, there's files. You can have an HRIS system that things are uploaded to, and you have areas within the HRIS itself where documents are. You could have paper, or you could use your file storage, right? SharePoint, right? We just know SharePoint from as an Microsoft Office product. As long as you're building in folders that are separated and those were consistently used for documents and where they're stored, you have limited access. So people are not, those that should not access those folders don't have access to them. You have all of your IT structure in place. Things are encrypted the right way. All of it comes through. You'll be okay with it. You don't have to have all the paper folders going.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that tackled all the lingering questions. Awesome, Becky. That looks like it tackled all the questions that we had online. Thank you so much, Kris, for your time today and imparting all the knowledge. You will have a email in your inboxes later today with all this content and an offer that Kris has for you that he designed as a bit of a helping tool if you are feeling overwhelmed in this space. He has a great offer, so check it out. It will be in your inboxes as well. And thank you for spending time today with us. And thank you, Kris. And we will see you all next month. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
Thank you.